Hello, I am Melissa Albertson. I am the Communications Director for the Missouri Dental Association. And as that, I also get to work with our endorsed companies, one of which is Best Card. We have worked with them since 2020. They are the endorsed credit card processor for 47 state dental associations and local associations at this point in time. So as well as the American Dental Association. So a great trusted company. They've been a great partner of ours. And part of the reason that we wanted to host this webinar is we are doing a promotion right now where anybody who signs up and switches to Best Card from the current processor they're using gets a $125 gift card and to Amazon. And more than that, though, just really the savings. We wanted to do this promotion with Best Card to highlight the great company they are, the service that they provide to members, and the savings that they provide. We have many on our board, many in our leadership who have switched to Best Card and experienced those great savings. So that was the main reason, just wanting to get Best Card out in front of more of our members and make them aware of their great services and savings. So today we are hosting Phil Nieto, who is the president of Best Card, talking about the service, the savings, and a lot of things that are happening in the world of credit card processing and how it affects your practices. So I'm going to let Phil take it over and start his presentation. We'll answer questions at the end and we'll get started. So take it away, Phil.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Well, thank you, Melissa. So today I'll go ahead and share my screen. Basically, what we want to do, credit card processing is one of those industries where a lot of times dental offices don't know exactly what they're paying for and why they're paying what they are. So really the goal today is we want to take it outside the realm of what's the salesy stuff that you're hearing from telephone calls you guys get on a daily basis and really dive into like what happens when you take a payment in the practice, what should it cost, and what kind of options do you have to maybe find a better solution, right? So once again, not a salesy conversation. And to that end, our background, Best Card, we originally started as a member benefit program created by the Colorado Dental Association. So essentially, they had so many members complaining that this was a part of their practice where they just felt that consistently they were being taken advantage of. It really became something that, they were like, all right, we can offer this as a program. It became so popular with the membership because it's a very common problem to feel like you're overpaying for this that, we basically just grew through positive word of mouth until, as Melissa noted, we're currently endorsed by 47 states and ADA member advantage. We've been endorsed by the Missouri Dental Association since 2020. And over the last 4 years, I mean, we really have saved a lot of Missouri offices on their credit card processing costs. Just last year alone, we saved dental office more than $7.2 million per year. So breaking it down, we know that credit card processing is not the most fun thing you're going to talk about on a daily basis. So every section I kind of broke up with a picture of a cute furry animal, a little bit of a palate cleanser, and then we'll kind of refocus on the question at hand. So, like taking credit cards into practice, virtually all dental offices take those credit cards because it's a really reliable way to make sure that you're getting paid. Not a lot of people carry cash anymore. Checks are really cumbersome and sometimes they bounce a long time after you think that you've been paid for that. So it's a really common service that a lot of time business owners, especially if you're coming into a practice, you don't even realize that you have to set up a merchant services provider, right? But the other side of that is as an industry, it kind of has a bad reputation and it kind of has a bad reputation for a good reason. So, the pricing can be confusing and hard to follow. A lot of offices don't know what they should be paying, like what's a good deal and what's not. What's a reliable type of pricing? What's something that's more likely to be taken advantage of. So today, this is probably one of the things that you guys get a lot of sales calls about. We want to kind of jump past those scare tactics and look at, all right, what is like the core of the service? What should you be paying? What is the office down the hall paying? Kind of looking at like kind of across the board what you can do to kind of cover this. So we're going to start off, we're going to look at like the payment trends that dental offices are seeing. How much is the average dental office accepting in credit card payments? Has that changed over the last couple of years? Has COVID affected that? And did it, once COVID kind of subsided, have we seen those changes kind of revert? We'll take a look at like just the hard data from the 10,000 plus dental offices that we work with. Then we're going to look at when you're trying to choose on a credit card processor, take us out of the equation. What are the options you have available? There's things like credit card surcharging. Is that a good or bad idea? What should you be paying as far as costs, and how do you get those costs low? And then what are the things that you can do in office to make sure that you have those low credit card processing fees, regardless of who your processor is? So we're going to kind of really dive into the details and hopefully come out with a couple of cost saving tips that can help you practice. And now a picture of a baby jaguar. So generally, what we have seen is that there have been substantial changes in the last couple of years. And what happened with COVID was it really accelerated trends that were already happening. More patients are choosing to pay for cards with like with credit cards for their payments because the ease of use and the perks and rewards offered by the card companies. That trend had been happening for years and years, but COVID really accelerated that as people wanted to move to really contactless payment options, right? With COVID in particular, people stopped using cash during COVID, and that practice really didn't resume in any like meaningful way. Cash as a payment method is pretty rare these days. You'll even find dental offices or even other types of businesses that don't even keep like cash on hand anymore to like make change. Um, the other thing that happened that we really saw is kind of like a drastic change. A lot of insurance providers started doing dental remittances using like virtual credit cards, and that also had an impact on how much like the average office was taking over, any given month. So here we have like the last 4 years. So this is like complete data all the way through 2023. What you'll see is in 2019, the average dental office was taking about $31,000 in credit card payments per month, right? Well, by 2023, that's almost increased, almost 50% to just under $45,000. So that is a huge difference over several years. You'll notice there's that big increase in 2021 with like COVID starting, but that hasn't really stopped even once like the COVID spending, particularities kind of subsided. If you put that in a larger historical context, from 2009 to 2023, well, in 2009, the average dental office was taking $15,000 a month in credit card payments compared to almost 45,000 now. So you've seen your average amount of like credit cards that most practices are taking basically triple over the last almost 15 years. Well, that's a big difference. I mean, when we look at the number of payments, because, looking at that breakdown, how much of it is tied to insurance? How much of it is tied to more patients choosing to pay that way? Or is it inflation and we're seeing like, just larger payments? Well, just on the number of payments, you can see that basically like that trend has really been something where you guys are taking more credit card payments than you were before. So, in 2000, like the average dental office was accepting 112 payments per month in 2019 to 147 in 2023. From 2009, that was 59 payments per month to 147. So, there's almost like that tripling of, the number of payments being accepted. That's a lot of where it's coming from. Now, it also, we look at inflation. Is it something that's had an effect on how much you guys are taking in cards? And honestly, it's just kind of a nice peek behind the curtain, too. Has the average office raised their costs after COVID? Well, if we look from 2019 to 2022, we see that basically like the transaction, like the average transaction size has increased almost 12%. In 2023, we saw that kind of, settle a little bit with actually a slight regression. But if you look at it from 2009, what you'll see is from 2009 to 2019, there's very little like increase in the average cost of like per transaction. So we see like very little difference there. A lot of dental offices weren't adjusting their pricing even to keep up with inflation. And we have like the Bureau of Labor Statistics inflation numbers since 2009. 2019 to 2023, we have seen a lot of offices that did choose to raise their prices to cope with the, increased cost of consumables, the increased cost of staff. COVID drove up a lot of prices, and dental offices over the last couple of years have responded, but still not to the, point that like if you compare against 2009 spending power, inflation in dental offices has still basically underperformed inflation in the total economy. So at the end of the day, like, yeah, that's interesting data, but what does it mean for your practice? Well, credit card processing costs are probably a larger part of your bottom line than they were even a few years ago. If you're taking 50% more payments than you were in 2019 and three times more cards than if your practice was open in 2009, that's a part of your bottom line you really need to kind of have a good eye on. Any part of your practice that grows 50% in 3 years, you need to make sure is like performing the way you need it to for your bottom line profitability. On top of that, like since card payments are primarily percentage based, more payments made on cards equals higher monthly bills, even if like your credit card processor hasn't raised your rates or cost to accept. Now that ties into like, what is the average dental office paying, right? When you look at like all of the, like, your credit card processing statement, sometimes there's so many different rates and fees. It's really, really confusing to kind of make heads or tails of it, unless like me, you do this every single day. So one of the things that you can and should do on a regular basis is to calculate your effective rate. Right? The effective rate gets around all the individual little fees and looks at just the total cost that you paid to accept cards. So to get your effective rate, what you would do is you would find like the total fees that you paid to your credit card processor for the month. Usually these are all on your monthly statement, but sometimes there are extra things that they'll bill you for that actually don't hit your monthly statement, but do hit your bank account. So you want to find all of those fees to your credit card processor and divide that by the total amount that you had in credit card processing sales. Right? That will give you your effective rate. And that effective rate is really important because it gets around all of those different ways they can hide costs and just looks at what did it cost you to run those cards. If we look at like the average dental office, generally we do a couple of thousand comparisons every year for dental offices, right? These are all dental office specific. So in 2019, the average dental office was paying about 3.06 percent to run their credit cards. Well, that has increased in 2023 to 3.53. 2024 looks like it's going to be a continuation of that increasing kind of pattern. So essentially, we kind of covered before. The average office since 2019 is running more payments, like more credit card payments than they were previously. But on top of that, the average office is actually paying a higher percentage than they were previously. A lot of times when you think, oh, I'm doing more of something, I'd probably get a discount. Well, economies of scale don't like, really apply if all of a sudden your credit card processor is increasing your cost as far as like the percentage, the per transaction fees, adding in a bunch of smaller hidden fees. That can really drive up the cost to where the average office is paying quite a bit more than they were a couple years ago. So nationwide, average dental office is paying 3.53%, and that's a lot. So like Best Card has pricing that we offer to all, MDA and ADA members. Nationwide, the average office pays about 2.22%. In Missouri, it's actually 2.14 on those same rates and fees because you guys get a higher percentage of debit cards. Later on, we'll talk about why that should be something that kind of lowers your overall costs. My goal when I'm talking to offices, though, is hey, what do we do to try to get your cost at around 2%? Like that is in credit card processing a really, really competitive overall cost. So with the average dental office paying 3.53% and the average, office with Best Card paying 2.22, that difference really comes down to like what are the different rates, right? So as we dive into that, we once again have a little bit of a refresher with a picture of a baby bear. So all the time, dental offices reach out to us because they're looking to lower their costs to take credit cards. That can look a lot of different ways. First, one of the kind of trends recently is surcharging patients to cover like the credit card processing fee. We'll kind of look into whether or not this is a good fit for your practice and exactly what that means. A lot of credit card processors really pitch this as like the best thing ever, but it can have effects on the business that you'll want to know, right? Second, we'll look at like negotiating lower fees with your payment provider. Say you decide to, kind of keep traditional pricing. How do you get the best possible deal? We're gonna go over like what to ask for and specifically like what to look out for. Last, we're gonna dive into what are the best practices to follow when you are accepting credit card payments. We have 7 tips that we recommend offices, specifically dental offices, follow. These are procedures in the office for when you take a card to keep your costs as low as possible. So, starting with patient surcharge, really, this is a trend that we've seen kind of a little bit take off. Not really big in the dental industry yet, but you may have seen businesses in your area like that all of a sudden started surcharging credit card payments, right? The general idea is that instead of your practice paying a monthly bill to run credit cards, an extra fee gets assessed to the patient as part of the transaction. Now, aggressively, like I said, this is being sold by some credit card processors as like credit card processing for free. That's not what it is. It's not that, oh, all of a sudden there's no fees associated with the credit card. It's that you're charging a higher cost to the patient to kind of, cover that cost. which, a lot of times credit card processing, after your rent and like your staff and consumables, credit card processing can be one of your highest monthly bills that as a business you pay on a monthly basis. So it can seem like a great deal. But remember, because nothing is free and there are long-term costs that can be under the surface, you really want to consider whether this is a good fit for your practice. So looking at like, kind of the pros and cons behind like that kind of surcharge. The pros, it removes an expected fee that you pay every month. But the cons, because you're assessing it as an additional charge to the patient, we have had a lot of instances where patients get, really upset and it can increase patient attrition. I go into some stats coming up, but just overall, patients don't like being surcharged for, having an additional kind of unexpected payment at the time of service. In addition to that, dental offices, your average transaction is a lot higher than something like 7-Eleven, right? The average dental office payment is about $350. Well, a 3% surcharge is a lot higher there than it is, if I'm buying a pack of gum, right? Second, like, it doesn't always play nicely with HSA and flex spending cards. Those cards are issued specifically for like, compliant medical services, right? So, hey, you're a dental office, we board you as a dental office. You're allowed to take those HSA and spending cards for, paying for medical services. Well, the surcharge has to get reported through as a separate line item. That's like a card brand requirement. Some of the HSA and flex spending cards are kind of onto this now, and essentially they'll decline transactions that have an extra surcharge because it's not part of the compliant medical spending. Not every card is doing this, but it is something to kind of be aware of because once again, kind of tying into the patient anger and attrition up above, if all of a sudden they can't use their tax benefit dollars, which also run as a debit card for you in the office, by the way. If they can't use those tax benefit dollars, then really at the end of the day, like they might be upset by that. The other area where it doesn't work is on those virtual cards issued by insurance companies. Those cards are issued with a finite balance. So if you try to add a 3% fee, the card will just decline. The only solution there is to basically request a different payment method, which we'll talk about as a tip that we recommend anyway. Or you can basically calculate the lower amount that you can charge to where the extra surcharge basically times out. With surcharging, you're not allowed to turn it on or off on a per transaction basis. So those virtual credit cards can be a little bit sticky. The other thing it can do is it can really increase your accounts receivables. Patients decide, hey, I would rather come back later with a check rather than be, given an additional charge on my card. Well, that doesn't sound like a big deal until it comes time to look at your receivables, and all of a sudden your, 30, 60, and 90 days receivables can be quite a bit larger. So even with offices that we've set up with surcharging, because it is something that we offer, we have noticed and had the feedback that, yeah, their accounts receivables have been a lot more difficult to keep down. And last, there are relatively complicated regulations from the card brands on how exactly surcharge can be implemented. We'll talk about those coming up. So when you're looking at surcharging, what do you want to consider? What are like some specific numbers that you kind of want to have in your head? Well, first, we talked before about like, your goal when you're taking a credit card should be to get your cost to around 2%. So, if we're doing math, that's one patient out of 50, like I said, if we're looking at like if you're having that patient attrition, one patient loss out of 50 should hopefully like, equal like your credit card processing costs. When we tried introducing surcharging in like some test offices, we did like patient surveys afterwards. 71% of dental patients that we surveyed said that they would strongly consider switching providers if a surcharge was used like for their preferred payment method. That was kind of a scary number to us because really truly, um, most dental offices thrive on kind of getting that patient in the seat, every 6 months for their regular treatment. For specialists, this might be less of a concern, but if 71% of people said they would consider not coming back due to like that, charge at the office, that could well outweigh any cost of like actually instituting the surcharge. In the average like general practitioner's office, the average patient will pay about $4,500 over the life of their time in the practice. If the average dental transaction is $350, well, that 3% surcharge is basically $10.50. Is that $10.50 worth a, likelihood, like even the possibility that the patient may come back? I'm sorry, may not come back due to the surcharge. That's a question that you know better than we do. You guys, you manage your practice. I will tell you, I've talked to a lot of practices that instituted surcharging and ended up dropping it. And like the average business that institutes surcharging ends up dropping it within 2 years. Part of that is the average, a lot more businesses that institute surcharging go out of business, and they could have been struggling financially anyway, which is why they chose to institute the surcharge. But the second part of that is a lot of, offices have seen lower, like I said, higher attrition and just a lower relationship level with their patients because of how they're choosing to charge. Um, Basically, with that, surcharging is also a little bit of a regulatory headache. So the rules, some states have like rules specifically on surcharging. Missouri doesn't have any specific rules. But generally, the rules are instituted by the card brands. So Visa, MasterCard, Discover, American Express all have rules around surcharging. If you violate those rules, like we have had merchants that did a surcharge on their own without telling us. We've actually had some that were threatened with $25,000 fines. Like that is the initial fine from Visa if they find that you're surcharging incorrectly. So if you're going to surcharge correctly, in general, you can't make a profit from the surcharge. The rate that your credit card processor charges has to match exactly the fees paid. So that's something that we'll handle if we set you up with surcharging, right? Similarly, your credit card system cannot surcharge debit cards, only credit cards. And your credit card system must be able to know the difference. Even if you don't know it's a debit card, your credit card terminal should know the difference. Like I said, you're allowed to surcharge credit cards, not allowed to surcharge debit cards. That's actually part of the Dodd-Frank Act, that basically there's no surcharges allowed on debit cards. And that's why that's kind of part of the regulation. Now, surcharges on cards cannot exceed 3% for Visa, and it can't exceed 4% for MasterCard, Discover, or American Express. On top of that, you have to give notice to patients at the front of the practice at any payment locations on your website and on all billing materials of a surcharge if you're going to levy one. If you're going to surcharge any credit cards in the practice, you must surcharge all cards. You cannot pick and choose. You cannot have a separate system to let you kind of turn it off. That is one that people have tried recently, but the card brands are relatively straightforward, and that's not something that they allow. Last, a lot of providers are selling non-compliant programs. You might see terms like cash discount instead of surcharge. Oh, just because you call it a cash discount and the credit card terminal adds an extra fee, well, that's a surcharge because the terminal is adding a fee. Like a true cash discount is if you list your price at $200 and you might give like a 2% discount, so $196 if somebody pays with cash. That's a cash discount. If you list the price at $200, even if you call it the cash discount price, if the credit card terminal is adding a fee, they don't consider that to be compliant with their regulations. We have seen a lot of fines from the card brands cracking down on this. On one payment provider was recently fined about $40 million for doing this incorrectly. It's just not a situation where you want to put yourself kind of at risk for your practice. Those fines do start at $25,000. So that's why we don't recommend kind of chancing it. Um, Basically, I just kind of walked through this actually. In April of 2023, the card brands did introduce new rules on how they were tracking how surcharges were being passed through as part of the transaction data. So, like I said, since April of last year, they have been very aggressive at kind of moving forward with trying to find this. And if things aren't being like sent through the right way, Visa does have a program where they actually allow individual customers to kind of, put out a notice that, hey, my card was surcharged and I don't think it should have been. So at the bottom line, right, surcharging may be a benefit for some practices than others. And when you look at like, what to consider and the unanticipated effects it can have on your practice, you really want to look at like, how much does your practice rely on repeat business? For kind of frame of reference, the ones who won the initial lawsuit with Visa and MasterCard to allow surcharging, it was Walmart and 7-Eleven were like the biggest actors in the class action lawsuit, right? Well, you'll notice that neither one of those businesses ended up instituting a surcharge at the point of sale. And it's not because, oh, they didn't realize that they could save money on this, but they realized that, like, hey, as a potential attrition driver, it just was kind of a loss leader. Like, accepting credit cards was something that kind of made their business run smoother. And as soon as they were kind of like, making that a less preferred option, well, they had the potential to lose more than they were gaining. Kind of for, in frame of reference, if your average acceptance cost is 2%, if you think there's the potential to lose more than one patient out of 50, it may not actually be saving you money. And, I tell doctors all the time, Have you ever had a fee charged to your credit card? And like, how did you feel about that experience in the business that did it? At the end of the day, surcharging is something that we're happy to offer. I try to be really transparent. We make about 5 times as much if we're surcharging credit cards than on the normal pricing that we offer through our endorsement for like all MDA members. It's not something that I'm going to actively like try to like dissuade an office to do, but I do think when we're talking outside of the sales context of that person that wants you to sign a contract that's very lucrative for them, this is something that I would think of as a business owner before deciding to do this. The other thing I will mention, actually going back, if you were to raise your own fee for service 2% or 3%, then that same surcharge is being added to the patient. You would make the profit instead of the credit card processor, and you'd be a lot less likely to have an angry patient because a lot of patients don't really price shop for dental services, is kind of what we've seen. So now we have a baby pig, just to kind of smooth us over after that section. So if you decide, hey, we do want to move forward with kind of regular credit card processing. We've talked about what does the average office pay? It's about 3.53%, and the average dental office for Best Card pays about 2.22%. With that, what are the things that you need to like know to negotiate? I mean, we mentioned before, credit card processors, the way it works, we all pay the same fees in the background to run credit cards. There's fees called interchange, which is like the fee that we pay depending on the type of card, and dues and assessments, the fees that we pay depending on the card network. Every credit card processor has that exact same cost. They might use terms like, oh, we do medical pricing or we do wholesale pricing. That doesn't really mean anything in the credit card processing area. Like every credit card processor can get you set up as a medical office. Every credit card processor has the same wholesale cost on the back end. That doesn't mean that what they're charging you, though, is tied into what the actual costs that they're paying are, right? Essentially, because we all have the same cost, we all have the same price floor. What we charge on top of that is where we compete. And we do know that, like I said, since 2019, what the average office is paying is increasing. So, understanding the basics. Every time any business in the United States runs a credit card, there's an exact fee that all processors pay on the transaction, regardless of who your credit card processor is. I mentioned before, like, that's the base cost. The biggest and the most significant one of these costs is known as interchange. If you have a good credit card processor, interchange should be 80 to 90% of like your total bill. If you have a bad credit card processor, it can be less than half. That just means that you're paying that much more on top of the actual costs, right? So there are a lot of different pricing methods. And honestly, I could go into detail on every single one of these, but like a flat rate. Oh, I only pay a flat rate of 2.79% and 10 cents per transaction per card. It's not the worst deal in the world, but it's not very competitive, right? Tiered rates, flat rates with additional surcharges. What I will tell you is the closer you get to the actual cost that like the credit card processor pays, the better of a deal you can get. The more the processor is kind of absorbing costs into things like a flat rate or, creating new fees, the higher a premium you're going to pay for like that service. So we kind of have like, what are the real fees? What are the real fees? What are the made up fees? What are the negotiable pieces? Right. So the real fees, these are the chain, like once again, the fees that all credit card processors pay. Interchange, assessments. Like, those are the two things that regardless of who you use, they are having that fee that they have to pay as part of the transaction. If you're, getting a flat rate of 3%, well, their profit margin is the difference between that 3% they charge and what they paid in interchange and assessments, right? If you're getting like interchange plus pricing, which we offer every MDA member interchange plus 0.3%, well, that means we're passing through all of the real costs on the left, and our discount rate under the negotiable section here is 0.3. So when you look at your statement, this can give you an idea of kind of what type of things to look for to know, hey, what type of pricing am I on? If you're just seeing a flat rate across the board, you're probably on that type of pricing and you can probably get a better deal. So like the real fees, those are set and no one gets a better deal or like has a separate cost on those. The negotiable rates. So that's, discount rates if you're on Interchange Plus, flat rates, tiered rates. You might see like a base rate, but then have extra like surcharges for other types of cards, like non-qualified cards. And you might see things like PCI compliance fees that you might pay on a quarterly, monthly, or annual basis. Those are all negotiable. Those are all things that like you can talk to your credit card processor about, and they'll have a fee for some of those things, but like what they're charging there is something that you can negotiate. Last, the made up fees. I think this is really important because when you look at your statement, if you're seeing these types of made up fees, This is purely like they've made these fees up and it's a pure profit for the credit card processor. A lot of times they won't even like tell you about this when you sign up. And when we look at why people are paying higher fees, in 2023 and 2024 than back in 2009, this made up fee category is really, really where like they're driving those extra costs. So if you look at your statement and you see transaction risk fees or risk assessment fees, settlement funding fees, non-EMV program fees, those four in particular are really, really popular with credit card processors that are integrated into dental software. That's where they increase their costs like crazy. They hardly ever raise the rates that they kind of, make really prominent on the page. And instead they make up these new little types of fees that then grow month over month until you're paying a lot more than expected. Hidden surcharges on the interchange. Those can be really, really hard to find. Same with like the hidden surcharges on dues and assessments. Those are things that unless you're doing credit card processing every day, you wouldn't even know what the actual cost should be. Annual network security fees, non-qualified fees. These are things that, like I said, when you look at your statement, even if you don't want to send a statement into us to like review, this is a good idea of like, hey, I want to make sure that I'm not seeing these types of things show up on my statement every single month. So if you're negotiating your costs, the real question becomes, what do you want to ask for? Generally, if you Google how to get a good deal in credit card processing, they are going to recommend on virtually every website that you ask for interchange plus pricing. Sometimes it's called cost plus pricing, but they're going to recommend that that's what you ask for every time. Because that means that the processor passes through those direct costs from the card brands, and the plus is a simple percentage and sometimes maybe also a per transaction fee where they compete with other providers. Um, the reason why this is the best pricing method, one, it's transparent, right? And two, because it's closely tied to the actual cost incurred with the transaction, you're going to make sure that you're not paying for any kind of risk that the credit card processor is taking on. So, we do see other types of pricing methods kind of close to this. Some providers will pass through like the direct cost, like interchange and assessments, and maybe a per transaction fee, but then they'll charge a really high monthly fee, like, oh, here's our $200 membership cost. Generally, if you actually do the math, it tends to be a more expensive option because the larger you get, the more expensive their membership costs get. And a lot of times they're priced in such a way where it's not really like super competitive once you break it down that way. Now, like I said before, the devil is in the details when it comes to negotiating your costs because, credit card processing has a bad reputation as a service because of a lot of hidden fees. I mentioned before those made up fees, like the settlement funding fees, transaction risk fees. A lot of times those aren't really disclosed very clearly by the salespeople, even if they're like, show up on month one of your contract. And those are also the fees that get continually raised just to drastically increase their profits, but also really increasing your cost. There's also things like terminal leases and early termination fees that you should avoid. A lot of credit card processors come at you with like, oh, this is a free terminal. Well, they have to pay for that cost. And generally what we find is, the companies that are offering you free equipment are, that's the most expensive free equipment you'll ever get, right? Over time, a lot of those companies can also increase their rates and fees. So, a great deal that you got several years ago doesn't always hold up over time. Oh, I just negotiated this in 2020. Well, by 2023, like their profit margin can be multiple times higher than what they were making at when you originally signed up. So we like to be really transparent with our pricing. Like I said, we offer interchange plus 0.3% to any MDA member. We also do a $100 equipment discount for any card readers that you need. Basically, we sell our equipment at cost for MDA and ADA members. We have a $15 monthly fee on our accounts. We have a $36 annual PCI compliance fee. We don't do any equipment leases or early termination fees. The average dental office that we did a comparison for last year saved $6,496 per year. Now, sometimes it could be a lot more. We sent out a comparison yesterday that was $47,000 in savings. Sometimes, we have ones where like they have great rates and we can't beat their pricing. We will always be the first one to tell you whether or not, like, hey, if you have great rates, we'll be the first one to admit that. But what we find most of the time is that we have very substantial savings. Less than 2% of the comparisons that we do, we actually can't save on. Almost every other comparison, we have savings on the rates we offer to all MDA members. The last thing kind of, we do have systems that are designed to automatically post payments to dental software, and it comes built in with things like website payments, text to pay, being able to keep cards on file for patients, and also being able to have like recurring payment plans or in-house membership plans. So those features are all kind of readily available. And it is one of those things like, just because, oh, it's tied in directly with my dental software. Well, a lot of times we can come in and, kind of replicate the streamline of like, how like those payments are accepted while also like really substantially lowering the cost. So now we have a picture of a puppy. And this is a good one because we're about to dive into like what should your staff be doing in the office to save money, right? So at this point, we've covered like, what can you do to get your costs lowered with your credit card processor? And like, how do you negotiate to make sure that you're getting a good deal, right? Well, if you have like great pricing, these tips that we're about to go through will help like kind of enhance that savings even more because it's really made to minimize that interchange cost. Remember, interchange is that fixed cost depending on the type of card. And with interchange, there are things that you can do to make that cost lower. Generally, you know, interchange can be anywhere from 0.05% on a debit card, just for easy math. On a $10,000 charge, it's a $5 fee, right? To 3.15%. On that same $10,000 charge, that's $315 to take the payment versus the $5 before, right? What are the things that your staff should be doing to help, minimize that cost? And there's one other benefit. If you're doing these steps that help minimize the cost because they minimize the risk to the card brands, it also helps protect your business from chargebacks where like a patient might dispute a charge. So, this is a great thing. If anyone is interested and wants to reach out to me, I can always send over. We have like a little one-page flyer with like our 7 tips that we'll cover here. Really, at the end of the day, these are great things that your front desk staff should know anytime they accept a payment, regardless of who your credit card processor is. Now, if you haven't done the work of negotiating better rates, this could potentially just end up saving money and like increasing the profit for your credit card processor instead of your practice. That's why we recommend addressing the rates first. But the 3 biggest tips to start out with. So, the biggest one, you get a lower rate if the card is accepted in the office than if you have to key it in, right? Why is that? Well, the chip, contactless payments like Apple Pay, even swipe cards all have lower rates of fraud than keyed in credit card payments, like substantially lower rates of fraud. So every time you take that payment with like the card present, you're going to get a substantially lower cost than if you key in that exact same credit card, right? Now, if you do have to key in a card, you want to always put in not only the card number and the expiration date, but also the 5-digit billing zip code and the 3 to 4 digit security code. Why is that? Well, it's an anti-fraud check. If you put in this information with the transaction, then not only are you going to basically save money on the transaction because Visa or MasterCard or whoever knows that there's lower risk of fraud, but on top of that, you're also going to be better protected in case of a chargeback. And card not present transactions are much more likely to get a chargeback than card present transactions. People just, oh, I forgot that I paid, or forgot I had a card on file, or I forgot I had this recurring payment set up. So every single time that you are running a card payment where you are keying in that card for maybe a patient that, insurance didn't cover as much as expected, you always want to put in like that 5-digit zip code and the 3 to 4 digit security code. Next, on like our big 3 tips, encourage the use of debit cards. Debit cards, as I mentioned before, have a much lower cost than credit cards to process. The reason for that is relatively simple. On debit cards, there's no perks, so there's no rewards. There's no risk that they're not going to be able to pay their bill at the end of the month. So you get a much, much lower rate, like much lower. I mentioned before, a lot of debit cards, like the majority from big banks, run at a rate of 0.05%. That's drastically lower than like what the average credit card runs at, which is, like I said, between 1.7 and 2%, right? Those debit cards, every time you take one, you're going to be saving money. So one of my tips for the front desk, train them to say, hey, instead of, training them to say, do you have a credit card you want to pay with today? Train them to ask if the patient has a debit card they want to pay with. If that's like little simple virtual like verbal prompts, a lot of times we'll just, customers do what they're told to do. If you say, hey, do you have a debit card you'd like to pay with today? If they say, oh no, I'm gonna pay with my credit card, not a big deal. But if even 1 person in 5 chooses to use a debit card because you've given them that prompt, you're gonna be saving money. A lot of money actually in the long run. Next, HSA and flex spending cards usually run as debit cards. So, as I mentioned before, encouraging their use is not only good for the patients because they get tax advantages on like that spending, but also good for your bottom line because those cards run at a lower cost than most credit cards. Now, on the opposite side of the equation, insurance payments that are issued as a virtual card tend to be the most expensive cards that you'll accept. They're corporate business to business rewards cards. So instead of, paying a small fee to directly deposit to your bank account, they're getting, those perks back. You should feel like perfectly like justified in requesting an alternative payment method because that can save a lot. I mentioned before that the average, personal like rewards card might run at between 1.7 and 2%. Well, those corporate business to business cards frequently cost more than 2.5%. So, it may not sound like a lot, but 2% to 2.5% is basically $50 more for every $10,000 you process. That's almost double our entire profit margin on the account, right? So taking fewer of those cards can help your bottom line a lot. Next, if you have people that decide to pay with a different payment method, or maybe they call back later that day, oh, actually, I didn't want to run this on that card, can I come by with a check? If you void a transaction instead of running a refund, that'll also help save you money. Basically, any transaction that fully processes, like a sale, incurs that percentage fee. When you void a transaction, basically they don't charge anything for that. And like Best Card, for example, doesn't charge anything to void transactions. When you do a refund, sometimes you're eligible for a percentage back on the card. But what we find is that most credit card processors keep that. And even in the best case scenario, that's usually only 70 to 80% of the card. And it has to match up exactly to the original card that was run. So generally, if you're able to run a void the same day as the transaction was processed, you always want to do that instead of running a return. The side benefit is that not only will that make sure that you're not charged anything, but your patient will see the money back on their account sooner than if you were to do a refund. Last, and this is a little bit outside of like the types of cards you take, but more in like what the office has to keep up with. Make sure that your office maintains PCI compliance. It's a requirement from the card brands, and honestly, it's a relatively easily avoidable fee. Your credit card processor should help you with maintaining PCI compliance. Like at Best Card, we walk everyone through that kind of by the hand. Like we will call, walk them through the questionnaire, make sure that we have them everything like taken care of. A lot of credit card processors just see this as like a revenue driver. So the fees for noncompliance generally range from about $18.95 per month to we have seen more than $200 per month charged to offices that are non-compliant. For something that is, 5 to 10 minutes of your time and updated generally once a year, this is something that like, we hate seeing on statements. But generally, only 27% of businesses nationwide are compliant. And that is like in line with what we see on statements that we review. About 73% of offices have additional PCI compliance fees that in a few minutes they can completely take care of. So, as we kind of covered, overall, any part of your business that rapidly expands needs to be monitored to make sure it's still meeting the needs of your bottom line. And credit card processing in particular, just over the last several years, you've probably seen about a 50% increase in how much you're taking there. So from there, you really want to understand your costs and know what's negotiable and, make sure that your payment provider is working for you and your bottom line. Best Card is endorsed by the MDA, and we save the average practice about $6,496 per year. We'd love to do a comparison for you and see kind of where we can help out. And I will mention that on top of that, we are also currently doing a promotion for MDA members through January 1st, where any member that signs up before the 1st gets an additional $125 in gift cards from Best Card and the MDA. It's an Amazon gift card just kind of as a thank you for using an endorsed service. And we really would love to see what we can do for your practice. So if you scan the QR code or want to send us a statement at compare@bestcardteam.com, we'll get you that cost comparison back with just a high level of detail of where exactly we can save you money. If you have general questions, our phone number is 877-739-3952. What people love about us is they call and they get a live person. And if there's a question for me directly, I'm always easily available. If you call the main number and ask for Phil, they'll always put you right through to my desk. So thank you so much for your time today. I know we're going to finish up with some CE and we may have some questions, but really appreciate, taking some time to kind of walk through this part of your business that you might want to understand a little bit better. Thanks, Melissa.
Thanks, Phil. I do want to ask just a couple of questions that have come up in our discussions and sometimes when we get questions from members who are looking at this. You mentioned like somebody this week who had a $47,000 comparison
Yep.
savings. Was that a Missouri person?
I
Um,
believe actually Florida this week. We
okay.
had one in Missouri before that was more than $90,000.
Wow.
Like,
Oh, but when you get doctors, even you've said before that they can sometimes be hesitant to switch, even
huh?
when they have a significant savings. Um, why is that? And well, answer me maybe why that is, and then I'll ask a couple more questions related to that switching process.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, generally, it kind of comes down to a couple of things. I think first, you know, I've been in business a fairly long time, and I've never had anyone come in and actually, deliver huge savings for me, right? Now, we keep a pretty close eye on our bottom line, but I think when you get like a huge savings number like that, there's just reasonable concern that like, hey, is this number actually legitimate? Um, you know, in credit card processing, the cost can get so bloated. I mean, I can't tell you how many offices I see. I've told you before, our average office is paying about 2.2%. I can't tell you how many offices I've seen that are paying more than 6%, 8%, even 10% to their credit card processor. We all have the same underlying costs. So, like I said, there's no reason why those fees need to be that high. A lot of people just don't realize what they were supposed to be paying. They didn't notice that there were all these little rate increases. So now it's just a huge savings. But the only reason why there's like that huge of a savings is because their credit card processor is really kind of taking advantage of them. So it is kind of one of those things. A lot of times when we have a big savings, what our sales team will do is try to like show them like, hey, this is actually like a legitimate number. We're always happy to send over like redacted statements from like actual clients so you can see a real, Missouri office that has the same pricing that we're going to put you on and see exactly what they're actually paying. Um, it is kind of one of those things. We kind of have to get over that hump of just why is it possible you're saving me so much? And especially, a lot of credit card processors will, if they do have like the opportunity to have a huge savings like that, well, they'll save you, all right, instead of saving somebody $90,000, they might save them 20,000 and keep the remaining 70,000 as profit. That's part of the benefit of having the relationship that we have with the Missouri Dental Association. Like we've already pre-negotiated pricing with them that is really, really competitive at saving for members. I think the last part I'm kind of hesitant to switch is just they think it's going to be a big imposition to make a switch in the practice. But generally, we can make these types of changes without, like I said, the practice is still able to keep taking credit cards the entire time they're making like the transition. We're really good at making that as kind of minimal as possible. Like generally, from the time that somebody signs up with us, we'll have them set up on our system within a week, be there for training and any kind of follow-up questions. Like customer service is really what we're known for. And then they'll close down their other processor once they've made the switch over to Best Card. So in that vein, like we do have a very thorough process to walking through that transition and just making sure that it's as easy as possible for the office because we know that dental offices are busy. The last thing you need to do is be, having a huge issue by trying to save a little bit of money in the practice. We try to make it as completely seamless as possible to make that switch.
One of my next questions was kind of along those lines. From a practical, step-by-step sort of process, what if they are with somebody and that company says, oh, you're in a contract, it's going to cost you a lot of money, you're going to, how do you help doctors understand, are there sometimes contracts they're in that they don't quite understand, or how do you help
Absolutely.
them through that?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is understanding exactly what they signed. A lot of times, doctors are surprised to find out that they're in a contract. Now we see it a lot like less often than we used to. More and more credit card processors are realizing that, trapping someone in a very expensive contract is a really easy way to scare them off before they even sign up. But we do have to all the time where like a salesperson promised that there was no contract. And then they find out that the actual agreement that they signed does have terms like that. So usually in that situation, what we'll do is try to get a lot of concrete information first. Exactly how much is the early termination fee? When does it end? What is the cancellation period, you know, before the contract might automatically renew that lets us cancel without paying that fee? That's really important because, we want to look at what's the best deal for the practice. If it's going to be, $1,000 to switch, but you can switch in 3 months, well, that might not be worth paying that amount in advance. And we're not going to try to get you to, have to pay that. If like I said, there's a better option for the practice. But a lot of times also, once we know exactly when that contract is set to end, we can look at whether or not the cost savings kind of outweighs it. If you're our average office saving, almost $6,500 per year, well, if it's going to be $400 to cancel and you have another 2 years, well, that means you're going to basically spend $12,000 in extra fees, or even a little bit more, almost 13,000, to save, $400 on an early termination fee. I think for a lot of offices, they feel like they've gotten burned on being promised savings before. But part of why we're endorsed is that we actually, are really good at delivering the savings that we show on our comparisons. That's why we try to do such an accurate job on our comparisons, so that if we look at, is it worth switching over, we can give a really kind of, clear breakdown of whether or not that's worth it for the practice.
And if a practice is in that situation, your team will help walk them through that and kind of go through those questions to ask and everything. They don't have to just
Yeah, that's
figure that
actually
out
something
on
that
their
we
own.
have them do before even signing up with us, is make sure that they're not in a contract, because the last thing that we want is some big surprise that, is going to put the practice, kind of in like a difficult position. So that's something that we cover before someone even signs up with us, is walking them through, making sure that, hey, we have everything kind of clear for this to be an easy transition.
I was also interested to hear and thought it was nice to hear, like that you said you can work with a practices in-house membership plans. I know that a lot of practices are starting to look at membership plans more as insurance companies get more difficult to work with. And so I think it was nice to hear, like, we can think just credit processing credit cards, but that you're really full service in trying to make sure whatever those practice needs are, whatever they have that they're doing in their practice, you can help provide a valuable service to them.
Yeah, I mean, one of the nice things about us is we are very dental focused. So currently about 96% of the businesses that we work with are dental offices, right? We have the odd ones of like, oh, hey, my cousin also owns a campground, and you've been great for my dental practice. Can I put you in touch with them? So we do have some that we do outside of the dental industry, but really everything that we do, like we have our point of sale software that we designed for dental offices, is kind of listening to that feedback of like, what does the practice need from their credit card processor, and making sure that we're providing it. So like the membership plans is something that we've kind of made available. Like, great, here's how you set them up. We're happy to provide information. We're happy to provide like web sign up pages. Just how to implement that in like the best way possible for the practice.
Yeah. Well, I think that today has been great. I have loved all the tips, and we are going to share this out. And like you said, I know if you guys have questions, if anybody has questions, they can contact you, whether it's the dentist or, of course, we know so many great dental team, office team managers that are, processing these things, doing these payments, looking at the information, and they can get in touch with you too. So we will wrap it up, I think, today. But thanks, Phil. And we have really appreciated you guys, like I said, as a partner, and know that you'll continue to provide great services to our doctors.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. And thanks, Melissa. And you have a great day. Okay.
Thank you.